Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ASU GSV Summit, version 2018. I think we're just privileged to kick off this year as one of the first panels. My name is David Roland. I'm the Chief Venture Capital Officer for Ingram Content Group. Up here we have at the far end Mike Silagadze from Top Hat, Michael Hansen, CEO of Cengage Learning, Bryan, Kibby, CEO of Knewton, Bryan Napack, President and CEO, the only one with two titles, President and CEO of John Wiley and Sons, and Kim Thanos, CEO of Lumen Learning. So the topic of the panel today is, has the Netflix of higher ed finally arrived? So we'll see if we can figure that out in the next 50 minutes. Michael, if you don't mind, I'll start with you, since you sort of made the big splash with the Cengage Unlimited announcement. Could you give us just a couple of seconds on sort of what that business model looks like, and then perhaps give us a little insight into kind of why now, what's going on in the marketplace to drive such a significant change in business model for you?
Yeah, happy to do this, David, and thanks for having me here. Look, the business model is actually very, very simple. It is everything we have, every course that we have, 675 of them, every title that we have, 22,000 titles, every platform that we have, whether it's MindTap or any one of the other platforms that we have, for a simple subscription of $119.99 per semester, call it $120 per semester, or $180 for the year. Plain and simple. No catch, no nothing, no added cost. The second thing that we heard from students is like, well, that's great. It's all digital, and that's certainly helpful, but we still like our print. So as part of that package of the 120 and 180, you will get a print textbook rental for solely the cost of shipping, $7.99 round trip. That's what you get. And that's the model. There's really not more to say about that. The question, why now? The question really started with a question that we asked us 5 years ago. The question was, is the product that we are selling to students perceived by the student as commensurate in terms of value with the price that they're paying for it? And the resounding answer was no. So we clearly didn't do our job. And that's where it all started. Now, it was a long journey to the point that we got to in December, and we're clearly still in the first inning, but that's basically it.
Okay. Bryan Napack, you're one of the traditional publisher players up here. With the Pearson's announcement that they want to be the Spotify of it, higher ed, and with the sort of Cengage Unlimited model, subscription model, you think we've reached a tipping point with the business model in higher ed, or have we already passed the tipping point?
I don't know that there's a tipping point. This is a market that has a lot of gates that you have to go through in order to foment dramatic change. There is certainly change going on, and it's going on in both the business, it's going on in the business model, it's going on in the distribution channels, it's going on in the product itself. And so I can't say there's a tipping point, because I don't think this market behaves like a consumer market at this point in time because of all the gatekeepers at those gates. So I do think we are in the middle of a tectonic shift, and it all starts with a simple thing called price-value proposition. And Michael points to a really important part of the price-value proposition where we, old guys, and a couple of them are in the room, men and women, made some decisions about what we were going to price our product at without any recognition of what the damn thing was worth to students. And I think Michael's pointing to that very dramatically. But there are two sides to the price-value proposition. There's price, and there's value. And value is a lot more complicated. In the old days, I would say, yeah, the content that we created was of tremendous value given the world that we lived in. But that same content today is not worth the same thing, because it tends to commoditize over time if you narrowly define it as words and images on a page bound between two covers. Turns out, students still like words on a page with images bound between two covers, and they tend to find ways to get it. Sometimes they buy it, often they rent it, sometimes they borrow it, sometimes they photocopy it, sometimes we photocopy it and send them a copy. which is, I think, the oddest of all the business models. Sorry, Michael. So there is still some value to that, but there's also value to the, or there's more value in outcomes. And I think we all know what I mean by that. Anybody that's in this room knows that we're on the real tectonic shift in this business isn't from print to digital. It isn't from one business model to another. It's from a lack of outcomes in the entire system, including the universities having a lack of accountability for outcomes, all the way through the professors to the students. Nobody much cared about outcomes. Now, outcomes are everything. And so you asked me about a tipping point. I will tell you we're on a long road to outcomes. And everything we're doing is about those outcomes. So that's my answer. Second to it.
Mike, given your position as one of the kind of the OER players out there, do you think that this sort of transition from the traditional publishers where they're starting, if they're going to deliver large quantities of content at a very reduced and more practical price for students, is that going to have an impact on where OER is or the traction that OER seems to have started to get in the marketplace?
So I guess I'll start by saying we're certainly not one of the traditional OER players. Top Hat ultimately is a teaching platform with a number of different tools, but the most exciting thing that we're doing is the Top Hat marketplace. And what the marketplace allows is for professors to collaborate with each other to develop either free or low-cost content. And I think that is actually a much more substantial shift that would be happening than just providing kind of bundled pricing. In fact, in most cases, because the average student purchases, from any given publisher, typically it'll be 0 to 1 textbooks from that particular publisher, the price of, let's say, $120 or $180, given the availability of used books and sharing and libraries and so on, that's actually not a substantial price reduction. If we're talking about Netflix, they didn't go in and compete with the cable companies by saying we're going to charge $300 or $200 a month, but we're going to give you access to all of these different shows. They did it for $8 a month, and that was a much more substantial shift, I think, than the bundling aspect of it. And again, going on with the Netflix theme, the most disruptive thing that Netflix did wasn't to do with distribution or the SaaS pricing, which had existed before. It was the fact that they changed the way the content was created, and I think that is actually going to be a much more powerful and dramatic shift. So the shift from a centralized model of producing content, which many of the OER players actually still follow, to a peer-to-peer model, which is a dramatic shift. I mean, that drastically reduces the cost of production and distribution, which is why, to plug Top Hat, our materials in our marketplace are vastly, vastly cheaper and of higher or similar quality than what you would find from the traditional publishers. So to me, that's actually a much more interesting change that's happening.
So can I respond to that?
You certainly may.
So, Deborah always wants us to keep the conversation lively. So who knows in the room how much Netflix spends per year on content? I knew you'd know. You know everything, Dan. They spend something about $6 billion a year on content. Exactly. $9 billion a year on content. Where does the vast majority of traffic come from for Netflix? Is it that stuff in the deep library? Or is it the A-plus content? Almost exclusively the A-plus content. That's why they're spending $6 billion a year, because they couldn't survive otherwise. It turns out the quality of content does matter. And I'm not suggesting that you can't create great content from open resources, but I am suggesting that the value of the person that puts that together has extreme value, and it always has in our market. The question is, what is that content? Is it words on a page with images bound between two books, or is it something substantial with interactivity and social components and teachers participating, which, Mike, you do in all that stuff? It has to be that total package, and it has to be delivering outcomes, and it has to be easy to access in the environments that they're in, and it has to be accessible through the business models and with the funding sources they have. That's the value. Totally agree. The analogy to Netflix is a very sexy one, but it's actually illuminating for reasons other than the fact that just Netflix disrupted an industry. Kim?
As the other sort of OER player, maybe a more traditional OER player, what do you think of Bryan's comments?
Well, I saw more polarization than agreement between Mike's view and Bryan's view. And, you know, I think we were one of the earliest OER players. One time I heard one of the best customer references I've ever heard, where one of our customers said, you should work with Lumen because they've already made all the mistakes, and that way you don't have to make them yourself. So I think, you know, cycling through what works and doesn't work with OER, we've certainly done our share of that. This disaggregated peer-to-peer, bring together resources, I create, I share, you update, that comes back to me. I definitely understand the draw to that. That is not the reality that we have seen. You know, I think that there is a reality in the market that we're serving that is, in many ways, we have low-income students being served by low-income instructors. Adjunct faculty members are having to stitch together jobs all around their states to try to earn a living wage. They are not coming home at night and saying, how can I create some, you know, some new content that I can share and remix with peers. They're coming home and saying, how am I going to keep food on the table and get some sleep tonight with all the papers I have to grade? So, you know, that's a real challenge. There's a challenge on the other side that is outcomes have to matter and have to become the measure of quality. And when I do my own kind of heavy, what we would call remix, if that's going to happen, you know, that's a small data set against which to truly gauge outcomes, and in many cases, faculty members are expert in their discipline, not experts in the measurement of learning and efficacy. So, you know, increasingly this tension between, is education moving in a direction where data truly matter, where efficacy and results truly matter? And if so, how does that change what any of us are offering? And if not, then I do think there's a lot more kind of Wild West of how content will continue to evolve, and more of this focus on the commoditization of content. But in my view, there's a real tension, I think, between, are we moving in a direction of more data-driven improvement to learning, more accountability across the board? Or are we moving into a direction where there is less and less of that, and there's more freedom and creativity that serves some really well, but with a loss for others? And I think, you know, ideally there are many options, and it's not an either or, but I do definitely believe there's a tension between those two approaches. I don't know how and not calling you out, but just trying to reconcile it, I don't know how in Mike's model you can do truly data-driven, efficacy-based work and evaluation of content to understand quality, simply because of data size.
I'm happy to talk about that. But I will say, so to the question of whether people are doing customization, our thesis was, when we started this marketplace initiative many years ago, was that professors, when empowered with the tools to develop and collaborate on and edit content, that they would actually do that, because there was a very strong group of people that said, you know what, we tried that before, it doesn't work. We're finding 89% of professors that adopt content on the top-end marketplace end up making substantial changes to that content, which is drastic.
What's substantial? Where's that threshold of a substantial change?
You know, it's hard to present kind of a full.
Just curious, because that is a hard one to.
No, but I think it's
some people have redesigned their entire courses.
The vast majority, 70% of professors, and I think it bears repeating, 70% of professors in this country are adjunct. They're making barely a living, and they are entrusted with teaching. And anything you ask them that actually increases the workload, they now have to figure out, you know, what truly creates outcomes. They have to figure out simulations. They have to figure out what are the right assessments for this content. Right. It is completely outside of the reality of these individuals. And you spend any time with them, you will notice that it's completely outside of the reality that they can do that.
If I may, to Michael's point.
Sorry, I just want to make this point because it's important. There are professors on the Top Hat platform that have published $20, $30 course packs that are making $50,000 to $100,000 a year on the platform now, which supplements their income and provides a very good incentive for them to continue developing that content, all while saving students millions of dollars in aggregate. And this is just in the last couple of years of the Top Hat platform, which is staggering. I mean, that's not even we didn't expect that level of engagement.
If I may ask a question to the audience briefly.
Yep.
Raise your hand if you're a community college professor or you have ever met one, or you've made a sales call to a community college professor.
It's really community college
professor. Right? And so I think you pointed out well. I mean, 70+% of professors, whether at a community college or at a state school, they're adjuncts. And one of the hardest jobs to get in the world is a community college professor. And the reality is, and to be candid with you, I've used to work at 2 of the major education companies, and oftentimes when you talk about business models, sometimes people are thinking about themselves and not the customer, because customers never ask. I've made tens of thousands of sales calls, and I've called on administrators, faculty, students all over the world, and they've never asked about a business model. They don't care about our pressure on margin. They don't care about our pressure on price, which is really what a lot of these business models are trying to solve. They're self-focused instead of being customer-focused. For example, I think Bryan mentioned, I think everyone here, the biggest issue in the marketplace is outcomes. Then access, anytime, anywhere learning, we all know what that is, and then affordability. So the essence is, if I were one of these, where here at Knewton, all we do is we pour all of our energies, all of our resources into just outcomes, period. Not economic models, not necessarily distribution models, although that's important to business. Everything has to be outcomes focused, and that's basically it. And if we continue to introduce, is McGraw-Hill a rental company, is Pearson a rental company, are they going to be this a smorgasbord, all-you-can-eat book company? Customers don't care about that. All they care about, am I going to get a better grade so I can go ahead and get a good job, and can I learn anywhere, anytime? And affordability is actually really important, but it's not the top of mind for them.
The only thing Bryan, I would agree with you, but I have to say, the first time that I went to an education conference, and this is unfortunately a long time ago, people were talking about outcomes. Right? They're talking about outcomes. And too many people use the word outcomes as an excuse for not doing anything. Just say, let's figure out what the outcomes are. And then you ask people, so what outcome do you really mean? Well, do you mean it's a better grade? No, it's not necessarily a better grade. It's about a skill set that somebody learns to actually get a better job. Is the outcome the job that they get, the salary that they make, the better earnings, et cetera? We can spend another 10 years of conferences talking about it. I think the question is, who's going to do something that sets the equation right between access, I want high quality content, I want it at an affordable price, and then if I get that and I enable that relationship between teacher on the one hand and student on the other, I think we'll start to get outcomes, and then maybe we'll have an agreement on what the bloody outcomes are that we're after. Because we don't have that agreement right now.
I think, Knewton, we are trying to solve that problem. Can students retain that information, and can they apply it, and therefore can they go out and get a better job in the marketplace? And I think we're all trying to solve that in one way, shape, or another, but I think if we all collectively just focus on that, retain it, apply it, go out and achieve my dreams, I think, achieve their dreams, I think they'll get there.
Yeah.
So we do know, though, with outcomes. So 68% of students choose not to buy textbooks because of cost. 38% of students take fewer courses because of cost. 32% of students drop courses because of cost. There's survey after survey of student data saying that it is an obstacle. So when we talk about the price value, it's a real obstacle. I respectfully look at Cengage Unlimited, and I don't think that's the answer that business models land at, but I applaud the fact that it's taking on a real issue around access and affordability and putting a new model out there from which all of us can learn and iterate. But I think separating affordability and outcomes are definitely linked. And until we solve the affordability and access problem, we can't take on any of the issues around quality of content or other kinds of ways we might measure efficacy, because they just, if I don't have access to the materials, it doesn't matter how high quality they might have been. So I do think new models that take that off the table as a barrier become really important.
Yeah, and I would strongly echo that point. One of the simplest, easiest ways to make sure that outcomes improve is to ensure that students have access to that content. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. And looking at the data, looking at, let's say, the inclusive access models and other approaches to ensure that students have content on day one, that has a really substantial impact. So I strongly echo your point.
The way we approach it is you can do all three things. OER content, I've been at these major companies. Content is important, no question about that. If you write a movie, you have to have a great story. But ultimately, you can do three things, and that's what we're doing at Knewton. You can have technologies that improve outcomes. 87% of the students who use our technology achieve mastery. You can have high quality, affordable content, and you can provide access anywhere, enable ADA learning, all for $44 for 2 years of access. You can do it all. The challenges for the big education companies, the cost structures are so massive. So what happens, you have to look inside. You have to look at how do we solve for our problems of distribution models and other things and demanding PE masters or publicly traded masters or things like that. It's a really complex problem that Bryan and Michael have. But if you're small and nimble and you're a pure technology play, you can solve it. I'll give you an example. It took Pearson McGraw-Hill probably 60 or 70 years to create a full math curriculum, pre-algebra, all the way through calculus. Knewton did it in 17 months. 17 months. We're winning in the marketplace. We're providing professors everything they want, analytics to run their classroom, high-quality content, an adaptive learning engine that produces results, proven results, and for $44 for 2 years of access. We can do that. Our cost structures are a competitive advantage, but our technology is such. So you can do all three at once.
But Bryan, I mean, I really appreciate the sympathy that you have for Bryan and me, but I would say it honestly is a bloody excuse, right? I mean, you're saying like, oh, my business model, I'm falling in love. We fell in love with our business model because it was so damn convenient and so highly profitable. Well, you got to go methodical. If you have a business like that, you got to go methodical and build the necessary platforms to actually be able to make that switch. And that's not something that you do overnight. But there's no excuse to say like, oh, you know, it's my bad private equity owners that don't let me do that. If you actually go about it and you build methodical, the legal framework, i.e. that you're capable of doing it from a legal perspective, that you're operationally ready to do it, which means you basically have to scale your platforms at a much faster rate than you actually plan to scale it, and that you are from a go-to-market perspective ready to actually talk to students and convince them of the value of what they're offering. And then you finally are from a cultural perspective, you're ready. And that is probably the single hardest thing in an organization. And you know, you've worked in this organization, this, you know, sort of sense of we're in this business model and we can't really get out of it. That is the biggest stumbling block. And that's what we had to overcome. And all I'm saying is like, you know, to me, it's an excuse not to tackle it and go after it, and you can.
Well, people ask me, because I've been in the industry a long time, I've worked at big companies, I've worked now for venture-backed companies. When you first came out with the idea, naturally I got phone calls from people who work for you. People work all over the industry and said, what do you think? I said, well, listen, I don't know Michael, but I do applaud this. He's taking a shot. And I love courageous leaders who take a shot. And what you did is you took a shot. And you're going to learn something. Bryan's going to learn something. We're all going to learn something along the way. So you're taking a shot. I really applaud that. And you are right. I ran one of those big companies. You have to blow it up. You have to be provocative. You have to do pretty crazy things. One of the challenging things, though, is what I just said is true. You have these pure tech companies like Knewton. I didn't found Knewton. I didn't build the platforms. I'm here to just basically disrupt higher education with what we consider a better solution. But one of the challenges you have is these pure tech plays can do more. In 8 or 9 years, they're going to have, I'm not an OER player, but you're going to have more OER players who just focus on one market, A and P. We're going to be OER player for A and P. And it's a real challenge for these big education companies with that cost structure. But I do applaud. You're taking a shot, and I love that stuff.
Good for you, Mike.
The only thing I would I know. Until the bad PE guys come. The only thing I would disagree with you on.
I love the PE guys.
This is not about me. Actually, you cannot take this shot if the culture in the organization and your team is not completely aligned with you. This is not about one brilliant idea of one. We have a lot of brilliant people in this building that keep talking about all the brilliant ideas. The question is, can you get an organization as big as ours, and you know, we're serving 11 million students every year, aligned to an idea and to a willingness to take a certain amount of risk. And I think that's where we are today, and I completely agree. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
So, Michael, I'm defining you as a big legacy dinosaur, and I'm in that camp.
Right.
I'm defining everybody else here as fantastic little children. But the fact is we're oversimplifying a very complex problem. It's not us versus them. We're all trying to achieve an outcome, and I think, by the way, we're defining the wrong outcomes. We actually need to define the outcomes, and by the way, it's not specific academic outcomes, because everyone has their own definition of it. And when I see the title, is the Netflix of higher education really here, I actually don't think about content. Actually, I think when we think about content in its purest form, it is boring and uninteresting to our audiences because they're not trying to achieve better content. They're not trying to consume better content. They're not trying to have a better experience, honest to God. I mean, when you go to Netflix, you're trying to have a great experience. That's a big difference between entertainment and education. Here, we're trying to achieve outcomes, and it's none of the things we've talked about already. And making those outcomes happen means understanding what they are, and it means defining who we are. So who is our customer? Who are we to them? Well, it turns out Michael and I do have a bad rap. We're very nice guys. We've got a bad rap. But if we turn around tomorrow and we start helping those people figure out how to achieve their objectives, we're going to win. And what they want is, so when I see Netflix for higher education, I'm not thinking content. I'm thinking, am I achieving the skill set I need for the price that I want so I can get the job that I want as fast as I can to earn a higher income? And most education is not the cushy education that many of us had in 4 years of liberal arts where we did nothing other than play rugby and drink beer. Well, some of us did anyway. I didn't mean to out myself that way. But it is very practical. And the Netflix of higher education, to me, is actually a more interesting concept than how you get your damn textbook or your damn courseware. It's how do I, because Netflix is a consumer proposition. It's not a entertainment industry proposition. The reason it works is because it helped people get to their outcomes. That's our challenge. And I don't think any of us have it right. I think every one of us is defining ourselves in a certain way that doesn't actually meet that need. You know who meets the needs of those outcomes? General Assembly meets the needs of those outcomes. They just got sold for a lot of money. You know who meets the needs of those outcomes? That community college meets the need if they're doing a good job and they manage to keep a kid in school. You know who's meeting those outcomes? Udacity's helping them meet those outcomes. So because they're actually helping people get skills that are helping them to get new jobs. And if they're doing their jobs, they'll actually help put them in the jobs like Dan's trying to do. You know, we just have ourselves wrapped up in this whole idea of publisher and I'm a software company disruptor or an adaptive learning company. And there's such little concepts compared to what our audience cares about. Until our audience cares about what we do, none of us have a business.
If I can add, this is the nicest audience, and this is really the nicest panel. Raise your hand if you've ever met me or know who I am. I worked for a big textbook company for 2 years, Pearson. For my entire life, Pearson and McGraw-Hill. I sold a major textbook company to a private equity firm. But I can tell you this. I said, content doesn't matter in the pitch. I said it does matter, I was being provocative. I said the only thing that matters, Mr. Berg, is what you do with that content. And by the way, my first 3 weeks on that job when I ran this company, my PR consultant said to me, Bryan, I know what you want to do. Terry McGraw just hired me to be president. If you do it, you're going to be fired. I said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I got on news, radio, TV, everywhere, and I said, textbooks are dead, they're dinosaurs, they need to go. The only thing that matters is personalized learning. We ended up buying 2 adaptive learning companies. And our performance, when you just focused on the students, our private equity owners were very, very happy. We beat all of our objectives, but we also were able to drive costs down and improve outcomes. So it's really nice of you guys for letting me off the hook, but I'd like to think I've been consistent with that message forever. What's the most important thing? I got a 16 on my ACT. I joined the Army at 17. I went to community college and went to State School USA. I probably know the struggling student as well or better than anyone in this room. And now the only thing that matters is outcomes, which is why I'm sitting here with these guys, who Oxford and some other schools. Outcomes, access I had, and affordability. I'm passionate about it now, and as running a small tech company, as when I ran the higher education group for a very large company. It's possible to do both. You can blow up your model, you can get your whole company behind you, and ultimately the student wins when you do that.
Who was the Oxford effort?
Someone's Oxford up here somewhere.
I'm not in Oxford. I got through the public school system in Germany.
Oh,
so.
God bless. God bless.
But my accent probably gives it away.
Why don't we shift a little bit here and talk about another aspect of this, whether it's the Netflix, and I think you're right. I think the analogies to Netflix and Spotify and all of those kinds of things are a little skewed because the entertainment world is going to function very differently. But what I'm curious about is, and maybe Mike, I'll start with you again just to put you on the spot and kick this off. As the model's changing in terms of how you are creating access to your content in a very different way, how's that impacting the content creation side of it? What are you hearing from authors? What do you anticipate is going to change in that from sort of the traditional way that content's been produced, even for large traditional players like you?
Absolutely, and it is, I mean, the first thing you have to acknowledge, and you have to acknowledge in the conversations with the authors, is the world is changing, and if you flip the business model like we're flipping the business model, you know, you have to work with all the parties that are in there and that all the parties that are affected by that. So our first principle was, as soon as we made the announcement, you know, we were very transparent with the authors. We were very transparent about what is the model going forward, what will they be paid on, et cetera. And it's an ongoing conversation, and you need to have that conversation, and you need to engage with them in a very constructive way. And we are finding that, you know, the reaction is predictable. The first reaction is, Jesus, I like the old model. Can we go back to the old model? Then you get, you know, sort of, yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, you know, there's probably need for changing that model. And then you go through the, you know, systematic, arduous process of having these discussions with the authors. I believe, to answer your question, David, that ultimately it will lead to what it should lead to, meaning there are authors that are phenomenally gifted, that have a huge amount of usage, that have a big followership, that have proven that they can actually build a really large franchise, and they will benefit greatly from that because clearly the model is moving much more towards a usage-based model rather than, you know, you created content once, you sold it many million times, and every time it gets sold, you get money regardless, right? So we are working with the authors through this, and this is what I said earlier. There is no flip the switch type of approach in this model. And this is, you know, to me, the most frustrating thing is when people say like, oh, we have this one thing, right, that will change and revolutionize the world. And every year it's something else. Like 5 years ago it was MOOCs, killed everybody, you know, everybody's going to be out of business. You know, 5 years later, they found, you know, a role, and I agree with you, they have a role in the marketplace. Let's just tone down the hype. Let's just do the hard work of actually gradually changing for the better the value proposition that we have to our end users, which are the students and the faculty.
Kim, you want to?
Well, when we started working with OER, the question really was, is there a sufficient body of reasonable quality of OER just for coverage? So all of the questions were around coverage. There's less of a question around coverage today, especially if you look at kind of, take the set of the 50 highest enrollment courses. There's fairly broad coverage. In many cases, there are many options for full coverage of OER. So our model around how we're engaging with content is very different now. We used to be in a role of really searching out and finding high quality OER, bringing it together to create complete course collections, and then filling gaps that were often PowerPoint slides or a need for test banks or things like that. You know, really from a coverage perspective, that work isn't complete, but for those courses, it is quite mature. So our content investment strategy now is much more around diving deeper into the student learning data in those courses and understanding better where students are failing. Day one access has a big impact, but there's still a lot of problems with day one access. One of the problems is that we've taught students over many, many years, and there's this kind of collective thinking around, do I really need the textbook because it was going to require purchase? You can have that available in the LMS from day one, and it doesn't automatically send the students into the materials on day one. With day one access, only 48% of our students click into the course in the first month. So there's still a lot of work to do to bring students into the learning materials. So that's a problem to solve. It's also a problem to solve that, you know, we see in a lot of the materials as we look at specific outcomes that there is the same failure point in the courses all across the country. So that means that the students need more than what they're getting in the content. In most cases, it's something where what the students are provided with are text and video and examples, and what they truly need is they're trying to understand cause and effect. They need simulations and interactives. They need better learning design in those courses. And so we've really found that our content investments today center much more around a much more surgical intervention in the learning materials to improve what's available to the students so they can improve learning that's really based on the student learning data we're seeing.
I really like what Kim's saying, and I've been following, Kim and I have been talking for a long time about what she's doing. And from the very beginning, it's been a really exciting, promising vision that is now starting to become reality. And as I listen to it, I hear someone who's sounding more and more like a publisher. Because
I'm almost sounding like an adult now.
Because yes, you are. But I won't be pedantic with you like I was with Michael, because it would be more offensive, I think. So that's really important. I love what Kim's doing. That's true. I really do. And I think it's absolutely a big part of what this industry is going to be going forward. If Kim can produce a product for a competitive price that achieves an outcome, she should win. She should beat Cengage and Wiley and Macmillan and Pearson. Beat them twice, for God's sake. Just, well, sometimes I get carried away. That was just a laugh line. It had no meaning behind it whatsoever.
See, if I said
but
that
like
same thing, it would be all over Twitter. You have a lot more latitude there than I do.
You think. Right now I'm being called an evil bastard somewhere in the world, I'm sure. Top Hat's doing tremendous things. I've watched the company from its earliest stages to what it's doing now. It is doing amazing things. Michael, with the business model, is doing amazing things. Bryan, this is all good stuff. So, Michael, I disagree with you on one thing, which is I think there is one thing. There is one thing. If we could figure out how to get all these bloody things to work together, then we'd be in a good position. I think the answer to education is always people and relationships. And I think that message, because you don't learn anything without relationships. You don't, sit in a room just staring at a box. You're not going to really learn about the world. You're not going to become more successful. So you have to engage in that relationship with your peers, with your teachers, with all the people around you, and often in job settings and on-the-job training and all that sort of stuff. But the point I'm making is, it's not just the content, and it's not just the adaptive learning platform or the classroom response system or the marketplace where you can get this stuff. It's how all those things work together, because it's a bloody bit of chaos out there. Until we can get the distribution and the content and the learning management systems and all these things working together, because I think that the one thing that's missing here is that seamless web of an environment. Because there are just walls up everywhere, and it's the walls that prevent access. Who was around when we were first motivated to do in the industry? There are some publishing people in the room. What was the thing that they talked about when the LMSs came along and we had to integrate with them? What did they really want? The number one thing that was going to move the needle? Single sign-on. No, that was for publishers that would happen. But it was single sign-on. Oh, they wanted to get to the stuff, but they just wanted, Susan remembers, they just wanted to be able to log on with one sign and say, that was an obstacle to an entire phase of the industry coming to reality. So, David, what you and Ingram and VitalSource are doing is a critical part of it, because it's level the playing field. It's not going to be just Michael's solution. It's going to be your solution. It's going to be Bryan's solution. We all got to solve this issue, and it's going to be solved with us working together, and it's going to be solved with standards, and it's going to be solved with a vision for who that student is and who they want, going back to our first point, not just about getting them cheaper product. I think we're all converging on a single price, by the way. And you and I talked about it, what it was about 4 years ago, and I think it actually is coming to within a spitting distance of that price.
If I may add something on the direction of content, and did you guys, David Harris, will you stand up? Do you guys know, do you know standing? David Harris is OpenStax. Do you have any trouble finding high quality content? No. Yeah. So content is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It matters. Ultimately, it's about what you do with that content. And that's really, when we talk about an integrated solution, that's really what Knewton is doing. When I got this job, I said, okay, I asked everyone in that room, all my employees, we don't have that many, where you went to school. They went to Harvard, Princeton, et cetera. Then I said the same thing I asked you, have you ever called on a community college professor? And then I took them through, here are the things that we need to do in order to win in the marketplace. You had to have administrative tools for faculty to run their classroom, because 70% of the students the professors are adjunct, and you need to give them that. We don't have that now, we do. You need to have content that is excellent, and if you have a system that helps to shape that as it goes, we have that in spades. And then you got to make sure it's accessible anywhere, mobile enabled, and then you have to have ADA compliance, and you have to have the right price. That's it. And ultimately, I said, Knewton is going to make this market, and then in about whatever, 30 months or whatever the number is, we're going to have 20 companies trying to be Knewton. And apropos what you just said, I think that's good for the student, because competition improves the breed. Ultimately, as we compete with each other to create better outcomes for students and all those things, we'll all win. I agree with you.
I completely agree with that, and Bryan, I agree with your notion of, we got to collaborate together, and we got to also create, ways of effectively collaboration. It's a technology challenge and all of that good stuff. But fundamentally, it's also, we got to recognize what the individual incentives of the players are in the system. and really overcoming these incentives and being open and transparent about it is part of the collaboration. Because collaboration is typically what people talk about in this conference, and then they go out and Monday morning they do something completely different that optimizes their own business model. And I think that's part of the game, but let's be open and transparent about it. And that goes with everybody. That goes with the president of community college, with a teacher, with an adjunct professor, et cetera. So let's just be open and align those incentives as opposed to deny talking about them.
I'll tell you, we are committed to making sure our content is available in all the places that students can interact with it and professors want to use it. That's our commitment. We're not committing to one business model or one company or one partner. That would be wrong for us. And so, it's important that we have a level playing field. Maybe someday there will be a single point where everyone, a Netflix, although Netflix isn't the Netflix. There's lots of places to get the content. But that is critical to us, and so we're spreading it around, spreading the love.
And I do agree on the teamwork. And my first 3 weeks in the job at Knewton, my lawyers called me in the office and said, Bryan, we do use openly available content, but we're also developing our own content, right? Our own assessments. And what are we going to do with that? I said, well, in order to get, you have to give. You make it available to everybody. So I suspect you guys are going to make your content available to me. That'd be awesome.
What's that? Content when you make it available?
We openly, you can use it. We don't license it. We don't charge. All of our assessments for our material.
It would be great to put a Creative Commons license on it. If you're bringing in OER to give back OER.
We have a Creative Commons license on it.
Your license,
all of
your
our assessments,
all of
everything that we create is openly available to my friends here, to you, to Mr. Harris, our professors, everyone.
CC by NC.
I'll make a point.
So it's not...
Yeah, great conversation.
Okay, I don't split hairs there. Not fully openly available, but a little bit open.
One of the challenges that we've seen to adoption of OER, and this is to echo a point that was made by a couple folks, is one, it's hard to find. It's very difficult for people to identify which OER resources that they should use in their course. It's hard to remix. And then finally, it's once you find the content you actually want to use, it usually comes as a flat sort of PDF in most platforms. And so I want to echo the point that the thing that will allow further adoption of OER and better quality content is, one, integration, so that professors aren't having to use 6 different tools, whether it's a homework system and an e-reader and whatever, and all of these things are separate. So a trend in the industry that's been happening across, including the major publishers, is integration into one platform that allows you to do your homework and your e-reader and your whatever else you need to do, which I think is going to lower the barrier and lead to a lot more adoption of lower cost content that ultimately drives better outcomes. And then the other challenge that we've seen among professors about not being able to adopt open or lower cost content is that they couldn't fit that content into the way that they wanted to teach. They have a certain way that they teach their course, but if they have these packaged pieces of content out there in the market that don't fit that, and so they're having to do a ton of work. So to talk about incentive structures, reducing the workload for the professor, that adjunct that's working 80 hours a week, is critical, and allowing them to pull pieces together in one integrated platform reduces that workload, reduces the costs, and ultimately leads to more professors adopting that content, which is what we've seen as a result, which is really exciting and I think better for everyone in the market.
So we decided as a company 5-6 years ago, there are a couple people in the room who could identify the date more specifically, but we decided that it wasn't enough to be a publisher. And that wasn't just about tweaking around the edges. It wasn't just about adding a homework system or what have you. Those are important things. And certainly when you were at McGraw-Hill, you launched a platform that's terrific and really allowed McGraw-Hill to jump up in its share. But our company decided a while ago that the real opportunity in education was education. And it was managing the life cycle all the way through. So we went out and we invested in an amazing company called Deltac, which was renamed Wiley Education Services. And Wiley Education Services is a company that isn't a publisher at all. In fact, it honestly doesn't care whose content you use or if you use no content. What matters is the success of the student. Success initially defined by an institution as attracting a student, then moving through attracting a student to signing up a student, to onboarding, to supporting that student and retaining that student, all the way through to graduation. Because that's where the real value lies for the student. Therefore, we looked at it before my arrival. Thankfully, there were some really smart people there at the time. And so that's what we're pursuing. Sometimes we're going to play in one part of the value chain. Sometimes we're going to play through one sort of a business model. But always we're going to be thinking about that end-to-end student life cycle, because that's what really matters. And we believe that the more our company is focused on that, the more that will be reflected in our courseware, in our test prep products, in our simple publishing products, where we're publishing a dummies franchise. If we're using an end-to-end, a dummies franchise product, if we're doing an end-to-end preparatory course for someone to take the CPA exam, we're thinking about the education and certification of that student. And in some cases, we hope to give them the actual certification. So I think we live in this, a lot of us live in this little content world. Even if you redefine it, it's not enough.
So we're getting close to the end. One last question, just real quick. This is the Innovation Summit, and so Deborah made me promise I would ask this question before we got out the door of all of you, which is just give a few seconds on, and as you pointed out, Bryan, this is a process, so there's going to be lots of steps ahead, but what's next? What's the next innovation that you guys are thinking about or looking at that you're willing to talk to in this market or in this room? I'll start with you, Mike.
So there's a lot of things that we're looking at. I think the innovation that we've started on and are now well underway about changing the way content is created is pretty disruptive, and I think it'll become more clear how disruptive that is over the next little while. So that's a major thing that we're looking at. The other thing that we're looking at very closely is how can we leverage the data? Because once you've got one integrated platform that students are doing everything from participating in class to doing their homework on it, to reading their textbook, to everything else, the data that provides and the ability to then identify students that are potentially at risk and could use interventions to help those students is tremendous and really valuable. And that's something we're looking at pretty closely as well.
Okay. Michael?
The single biggest innovation we're working on is bringing high quality content in an affordable way to millions of students every year. That's what we've got to work on. We're working on it with a new business model, and then we'll build on that. And we will figure that out in the way that we interact then with students and with faculty, and let them, in a way, guide us around the issues. What are the outcomes that are important to them? So this is not about me proclaiming, sitting in a room full of very smart people, proclaiming what the next thing is. I think it will be guided by the user.
Bryan?
For Knewton, it's more about helping people understand how to win in these markets. Early days when I took the job at Knewton, I did some YouTubing and I watched my friends from Lumen online, and they said, well, the university just needs to do a better job of helping students find OER. Instructors find OER and use it. And the innovation that we have at Knewton, we have the AI, we have all the things I've described to you. The innovation is, my hope is to show others who want to enter the space that no one ever finds you, and that you need a sales force, and you need to support the faculty members. And one of the reasons that these major education companies have been insulated and have been able to go slowly and have $400 textbooks, which still exist everywhere across the country, is the smaller ed techs really don't understand this part of it. You have to go out and get the business, and you have to go out and fight. And so to me, that's an innovation, in addition to everything else we described, that we're trying to help show the world about Knewton as well.
So about, I've been with Wiley for 3 months, so I know it all. And Ella Balagula, who's sitting in the second row, runs our higher ed publishing business along with a number of our other businesses. And the blood drained from her face when I said, Ella, you don't actually have a product innovation problem. Because we're publishers are really product-centric companies. And when I say publishers, I'm including all of us in that, because we are essentially working on the tools and content that students use. Don't disagree, you can disagree with me later. I said, Ella, you have a business model problem. And when I say business model, I'm saying all the things that we are talking about up here, everything that gets in the way of student to access to effective education. And so I do think that what Michael's doing is truly pioneering. I don't think it's for everyone. I think inclusive access, which are the first times those words have been used on this panel, yet it's the thing everybody's been talking about for the last few years, and you guys are pioneering it. I think we have to make sure the innovation we're going to have, we've got plenty of good content, and it's gold standard, and I'll put it up against anyone's in any course that we participate in. If it's at the right price, it's going to win. Fantastic stuff. That's not the problem. It's the business model. That's the problem. So that's the first thing I would say, and that's what we're working on. The second thing I would say is the extent to which we can do what I said earlier of extending our notion to the entire student life cycle. That's the challenge that's really hard for any of us to accomplish, because none of us on this panel come from that point of view. We have to think like a university administrator. We have to think like an employer. We have to think like a student trying to get a job. And if everything we do is attached to that sort of student life cycle notion, then we win, even if it's just a single course.
Kim, you get the last word.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. So Bryan's right. Wiley is capitalized to go broad across everything. We are very focused within the course. We want every student who's in the course on the first day of the course to make it through to completion with a C or better with mastery of the course. And the most exciting thing I think we're doing is that we have identified a set of interventions in that eliminate the achievement gap for Pell eligible students. And so we're really looking at how to expand that and extend that to really take low income out of the factor for whether students will pass or fail. So looking forward to moving that work forward.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank all of you for a very engaging conversation. Hope you all enjoyed it.